Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood, and you are watching The Political Vigilante. We are joined by a friend of the show, returning guest, Whitney Webb, who writes for Unlimited Hangout, among other places. Whitney, how are you doing today?
Can't complain. The world's totally insane all the time. You wake up and realize you're living in clown world every day. You have dreams that are weird, and you're like, oh, those were just dreams. And then you wake up and look at the news, and it's
living in clown world. Before we get to your latest article that's out on Unlimited Hangout, I wanted to talk to you because this happened a couple weeks ago, but you were in the middle of a move about what happened on Patreon. You've been basically completely shut down. They've limited you, or they've completely deplatformed you from Patreon. Tell us.
Yeah, I was suspended, and they basically were like, if you don't delete these articles on your own website that you never shared on Patreon, we're going to, take action against your page, and they were still going to take supporters' money, but not allow me to access it until I did what they wanted. I'm not going to censor my work because it's not wrong, and Patreon actually admitted that. So I ended up just basically unpublishing my Patreon page because I don't want patrons, supporters to be charged if the money is going to be going to Patreon that is censoring me or attempting to. It's just, who would do that? So, I didn't really have a choice, but they sort of made it look like I did have a choice. Like it was, I had to unpublish it, but if I hadn't, I would have been screwing over my supporters, and I still would have been demonetized basically regardless, unless I deleted these articles that they wanted me to delete.
What were the articles?
So they were two articles that were part of my series about Operation Warp Speed. And the main one they took issue with, but before that, so they didn't, the first email they sent is like a template email. And in there, they said that I had medical misinformation in some of my content. And then they said, here's an example of medical misinformation on your page. And in my case, they left it blank, whereas other people that got the same email did not have that space blank. And so I responded and I was like, well, it's blank. So what's misinformation? Can you let me know? Because how can I correct it if you won't even tell me what it is or give me an example? And so after that, the lady responded with links to a couple articles, one in particular. And then I responded to that saying, explaining why it wasn't misinformation, if she could point to anything factually inaccurate. And then she said, well, it's not a matter of factual inaccuracy. It's that people that read your content may decide against getting, in this case, this article was specifically about the AstraZeneca vaccine and conflicts of interest with that vaccine. For example, Google is actually a major investor in the company making that. So it's not just Oxford University. They're not just university researchers. The two developers of that vaccine created a private company that's funded by Google, and the former head of Deutsche Bank derivative stuff and all of this, and planned to cash in big. And they promoted themselves in media before that article as being, the nonprofit vaccine and all of this stuff. And also one of the developers has really shady ties to an organization called the Galton Institute, which used to be called the UK Eugenics Society. So anyway, I went over some of those connections and controversies that the center at Oxford that produced this has been in the past regarding trials that went very poorly and were basically they covered up problems that had come up, safety problems that had come up. This was back in December, and now there's several countries that have suspended the use of that vaccine, and Denmark has banned it completely. So, are those governments spreading misinformation? I was trying to do critical reporting on big pharma. I guess it's inconvenient politically to some people right now, but are you really going to censor me for factually accurate information that might make people act a certain way that you don't like? I'm not trying to manipulate people, but I thought it was in the public interest, like all of my work. I think it's a really crazy situation. So anyway, I'm not on Patreon anymore. What I did is through my website, Unlimited Hangout, I set up an alternative to Patreon that's there where I make posts, other people can make posts and comment and all that stuff, sort of like Patreon, and all the premium content that I have on like Rockfin and stuff like that is also available there. If you go to the support us tab on my website, you can find it. So, but basically that's the situation with Patreon. It's a really dangerous precedent, because what if they apply this to something else other than vaccines and say, well, your information isn't factually inaccurate, but we don't like how it might make people perceive something or act. And in this case, I was talking about a product of a, that's backed by one of the, I think actually AstraZeneca is the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. So, and they have no liability either. So if they cover stuff up during safety trials like they have done since they were founded years ago, as a public-private partnership with GlaxoSmithKline, another giant pharmaceutical company, the fact that they don't want people to report on these guys that have no liability for stuff, giving no liability to pharmaceutical companies in any case, is like not a good idea, because they don't have a good track record. I'm not even talking about vaccines, like all products that they produce. A lot of times there's controversies that come up and the FDA helps cover them up in some cases. So
this is insane, right?
Yeah.
That you literally, and this is the problem. And you and I talked about it when you came on the show after what happened at the Capitol, was like they're going to use the Capitol as an excuse to just censor anybody. And now part of it is like, so any questioning of any of the vaccines just makes you an anti-vaxxer wingnut. Did they just lump you into that category that's pushing misinformation? And it's like,
yeah, there's no nuance anymore. If you haven't noticed, like if you bring up any sort of criticism about big pharma, people say, oh, you can't criticize big pharma during a pandemic. Need to stop talking about it. And that's just silly. Sorry. These are giant billion-dollar companies that have a track record that is really awful. And, Pfizer alone has had to pay out like billions in out-of-court settlements over the past few years, or decades, really. So, it's insane. Pfizer also in the past, just using them as an example, they bribed officials in Nigeria because a trial they were doing on children with a vaccine they knew was actually ineffective at the time. They bribed officials to sort of smooth that over after kids died in it. Pfizer was never really held accountable for any of that stuff. So, yeah, they have a history of corruption. I don't want to give I'm not in favor of giving them no liability, because it's all money, all gain for them. And, it's the public that, if someone does suffer in effect, they have no liability. They can't go after the pharmaceutical company that's responsible. It's just going to be taxpayer money that you're paying for, going out to these people.
Yeah. And it's the other thing too, is like people should note that the COVID vaccines, they're different. They're different. Companies have come up with them, and each one's different to certain degrees. Like the Moderna one is the mRNA or whatever, which is a different type of.
Yeah. Well, those are just the ones approved in the US. Like Cuba has one. I think Mexico just came out with one. China has one. Russia has one. So, we're talking about the ones specifically that were approved for use in the United States and in general, the UK and the EU, places like that. So, but, if you're going to criticize the actions of one company and be like, well, they have a history of, in the case of these Oxford guys, basically fudging the data so that they can make it look like something's more effective than it is, so they can get more likely to get it approved, more likely to sell it, make money for it, et cetera. They have nothing to, lose if there's no critical reporting on what they're doing, but it's in the public interest that people know, because the safety trials are there for safety. So if the safety trials are done in a way that's, shady, we can't really assure people that's, it's safe, and you're actually like feeding, if you're a pro-vaccine person, in this case, you're actually, in a sense, what you would be fueling vaccine hesitancy if you want to cover up everything that is bad that has ever happened in relation to vaccines and pharmaceutical corruption, or really any instance. That stuff needs to be known to the public. And I think those companies need to be held accountable like they are for their other products. A lot of these companies are the same ones, that produce things that are addictive or help fuel the opioid crisis and stuff. That's big pharma, right? And by the way, under during COVID, I mean, fentanyl has just exploded. And I'm not just talking about opioid overdoses and stuff under lockdown, but actually prescriptions of fentanyl have gone way up as well. And some companies that were going to be prosecuted for their role in the opioid crisis in 2019 are all now, PR heroes because they've helped, fight the pandemic, they say. So it's just interesting.
Wow.
So, we can't, people that are going to bat for oligarch-owned pharmaceutical companies that have, a record of crimes, I just don't get it. And I think there needs to be nuance. Like if you're going to report on these things or even bring up any sort of criticism, doesn't necessarily mean you're anti-vaccine. In the case of the swine flu thing, when Obama was president, there was that rush swine flu vaccine, and it came out a year later that it caused a severe, it was directly related to causing like narcolepsy and neurological problems in a lot of people all over the world, because it was rushed, there was pressure on it, and they were given no liability. And we have a historical precedent that's not that far away from when that was not in the interest of the public, specifically, public health. So. Anyway,
yeah.
Sorry if that was a little rambling, but I just think Patreon, I don't understand why this is information they feel needs to be kept from view. But it's not even that really. It's more like they claimed ownership over stuff that was on my website that wasn't on Patreon at all, and they went after my income. It was more like you delete the articles on your site that we don't like, or we will take your income away. And if I hadn't set up a Rockfin channel as a backup a couple months ago, which I actually made some of people that were supporting me on Patreon mad that I had set up another avenue for premium content on Rockfin and stuff. If I hadn't done that, this thing with Patreon would have wiped me out. I would not I would not have an income. That was my only income until I made the Rockfin channel. So
yeah, that's why I set up my Rockfin 2 years ago, was as a backup plan, because I knew that look, I saw some shows get deplatformed or deplatformed from Patreon a couple years ago, and I was like, well, that they're a big, at the end of the day, they're a big tech company, and someone could do that, or they could get bought out by somebody like Google or whatever, and just we could get shut down. And this is how it works. I mean, it's when I got demonetized on YouTube, and I'm still demonetized February 1st, and a bunch of other shows got hit, in the shows in the same vein as mine, in terms of topics and politics, I had conversations with some of them who they were like, well, I'm going to have to start self-censoring. I'm going to not cover this or change that in the title or whatever. And I'm like, that's bad. That's really bad. That's letting them win. And so I'm glad that there's platforms like Rockfin, and I'm glad that you were able to, that's what, it's interesting to hear what you said about how you just kind of set up sort of your own type of Patreon on your own website. And I think that's what a lot of us are going to have to eventually do.
Yeah. Well, people were like, well, you can use Subscribestar, and started listing off some like Patreon alternatives. But after what happened with Patreon, like if another one of those sites does the same thing, I don't want to have to inconvenience the people who are nice enough to support my work to have to hop from platform to platform with me. I mean, why not just cut out the middleman and have it through the site? So that was, the idea behind it.
It really, in hearing what they did to you, it makes me want to set up my own type of thing like you did on my website. And then, I'm really tempted to, it's tempting to just like bail on Patreon, because I'm just like, they could do it to me for whatever reason at any moment, and just come up with some nonsense and say, oh, Graham, you got to pull that down. But also,
well, Tim Dillon, who's one of the biggest podcasts on Patreon, is actually considering leaving Patreon over this, and is looking at alternatives. Because I've been on the show probably like 4 times or so. Well, some people were really not pleased about it, and I can't really blame them, because I obviously was not pleased about it, but it's the precedent itself that's bad. And I think people need to keep in mind too, that some of these things that are being justified in the name of, it's censorship that's going on in the name of, the pandemic, isn't just going to stay with that. It's never like that. And censorship has never been like that when it's been practiced by Silicon Valley or the government.
Well, the other thing too, and it's like, and all they respond to is money. That's all they care about. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
if somebody like Tim Dillon that's generating a lot of revenue for them pulls out, and then a bunch of us all kind of do it in solidarity, because I'll be honest with you, in the last couple of weeks, I've gotten a bunch of emails on Patreon saying, I'm leaving in solidarity with Whitney and I'm joining your Rockfin. My Rockfin numbers have gone up,
Oh, well,
thankfully,
thanks.
since YouTube demonetized me. But then in light of what happened to you, a lot of people like, I'm out. I don't want to give them my money. And like functionality, Patreon's a really great site. I mean, in terms of like supporting content creators, but when they
that's how they get you sucked in, like YouTube too, was better than the other platforms like it, and had a better app for mobile and all of this stuff. And that's how everyone, came to sort of depend on it for videos and live streaming and all of that stuff. And then once they have everyone there attracted by the good features or whatever, they start to, censor and try and, manipulate that monopoly once it gets to sort of like a monopoly styles, system. And Patreon, in a sense, for like crowdfunding, for content creators, and it's the same sort of deal.
Yeah, they really just making it very clear. All these platforms are making it very clear that, if you just stay within the lines and, do funny cat videos or makeup tips or whatever, if you just do that kind of stuff, just like, cooking tips or whatever, then you're fine. But the minute you can talk politics, provided it's within their framework of like, one of the parties is better than the other, or what, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That ridiculous.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. Professional wrestling platform that makes your viewers think that the other team is worse than your team or whatever. And so they don't want any of this stuff. I mean, Glenn Greenwald's talked about this. He's and a bunch of other journalists have all been writing, and they're doing it in every way, shape or form. And this is, we've all been watching it happen slowly for the last couple of years. And now they're just going even harder now that, that Trump's gone and a lot of people are back to brunch with Joe Biden. They're just going to.
And man, that is true. It is crazy. Like Noam Chomsky recently, I think he was on with Mehdi Hassan, his name is, right? Saying that under Biden, I'm, surprised that it's actually not that bad domestically. And then said the foreign policy leaves something to be desired. But I'm like, have you looked around domestically recently? I mean, if it was Trump in office, we wouldn't be hearing the end of it. But like you were saying, a lot of people, Biden gets in, we vote out fascism. Okay. And then, here we are. And, parts of the country are occupied by, the National Guard, basically. I mean, it's like really, is that a joke that things are better domestically right now than they were? I don't know.
It's insane.
Last October.
It's like the Minneapolis police have literally detained press people. They've done all this stuff. They've said you can't film this. The Minneapolis police have done this. And where's the outcry? Where's the and again, they're just, and again, so they know that there's going to be a Black Lives Matter protest after the Minneapolis police kill another black man, Dante Wright, and they show up armed to the teeth. Yet when they have credible intel, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people at the Capitol. Gee, there's no cops.
And we just heard, it actually just came out pretty recently, confirmed that there was a stand down order for Capitol Police. It was allowed to happen. And instead people are talking about, other parts of that more recently, like the revelations about this Sicknick, Officer Sicknick or whatever, that died. And it was said that he had been attacked by the protesters. And it turns out he actually wasn't. But within that, it came out that there was a stand down order and there's been no interest in really doing anything about it. The guy that was in charge of the Capitol Police resigned a few days later after January 6th, Stephen Sund. He hasn't been held accountable. And what's weird is that if you look back at his history, you look at his bio on the Capitol Police website from 2019, it doesn't list his private sector experience at all. But not that long ago, he actually was a vice president at this consulting firm for intelligence in the US. Called Nobliss. The chairman of the board is Michael Chertoff, former head of DHS, who is intimately involved in a lot of companies that stand to benefit from high-tech domestic terror policing and things like that. And, who after January 6th, Michael Chertoff was on cable news saying, buckle up, there's going to be a lot more than January 6th. And now we know it was a stand down order. It was allowed to happen. We've all seen the videos of the people being waved in. If we need to really reassess, if you haven't already, what happened then, because if they set a trap for that, for, Trump supporters, because obviously there were crazy people in the Capitol that were dangerous or could have been dangerous. Okay. But I mean, there were hundreds of people in there, and, some of them were like old ladies with flags and stuff that saw people waving them in and stuff. I mean, not everyone there was planning for violence that was physically inside the Capitol. I think that's abundantly clear. And police were like high-fiving people, creating this. If you were there, I would assume that would make you feel at ease that, it's okay for you to be there and all of this stuff. But if they set a trap like that for the right, this war on domestic terror thing is going to be both left and right. It's a front to go after dissent. That means they're going to set some sort of trap for the left at some point. I mean, conveniently, it wasn't today with the results of the trial about the killing of George Floyd, right? But who knows what can happen in the next couple of months? Another person gets killed. There's insane amount of mass shootings going on right now. Some of them being, done by ex-cops that were accused of, I think there was one that was accused of like pedophilia or something, and then went on a shooting rampage pretty recently after being kicked off the force or something. I mean, there's a lot of violence going on, and, it's going to be not unlike last year. I mean, where last summer conservatives, Republicans were screaming about Antifa being a terror group. You get the right situation on the streets of a particular U.S. city, you will have Republicans in Congress backing the same domestic terror legislation that was introduced by Democrats after January 6th, as long as Antifa is added to the language, if it's not already. And I think people on the left really need to, it's hard not to be emotional about the stuff. Police violence really is insane. But that's because the US state is extremely violent. What you were talking about police doing that to journalists, the US military abroad shoots journalists sometimes, or the police forces trained by the CIA or CIA cutouts like USAID kill journalists in Latin America and other places. So, this isn't something, a lot of what's going on right now is about policies that the American people essentially rubber stamp to happen in other countries coming home to roost, because once the national security state plunders everything, around the world, I mean, they were eventually going to turn this stuff on the American public at some point. And if you look at the history of this type of stuff, it's specifically like Palantir, post 9/11 surveillance stuff, what was going on in Iran Contra with the continuity of government protocols, trying to make dissident lists. I mean, they tried in the Reagan administration, as part of Iran Contra, made a list of people on a database that were to be rounded up in times of trouble. They didn't really, or times of panic. They didn't really specify what like dealt with or rounded up means, but they just sort of leave it to the imagination. I guess it's not hard to think about it, but if you go to a protest just once, you could have been on that list, or not paying your taxes 1 year, you get added to that list. And that whole continuity of government scenario in the Reagan administration could have been triggered for something. This is their example, mass domestic dissent against a US military intervention abroad, like the Iraq War or something like that, or, a coming war with Iran or something like that. And, if you think the mentality of the US government changed then, it hasn't. It's no coincidence that one of the architects of DHS, Richard Armitage, was a former CIA officer for the dissident roundup program in the Vietnam War called the Phoenix Program that, had a ton of innocent people dragged into that, a bunch of innocent people tortured. And, the death toll of that is supposed to be at 40,000, most of them civilian, the vast majority, if not all of them civilians in that case. So, the people that do that abroad and then they turn their attention to homeland security, I mean, it's disconcerting. And the fact that Americans for so long have been content for this stuff to be done abroad, whether by intelligence agencies, by the military, has consequences. And a lot of people, as long as life was normal and there was, entertainment to distract them and other stuff, we're fine having their tax money go to this stuff as long as it doesn't impact their personal life. Well, now, that is changing. And I really hope more people can get wise to what this push for domestic terror, a new war on domestic terror, what it's really about. This is an old agenda, and it's not going to go away unless people say no thanks. And unfortunately, we have situations where there's an exacerbated partisan divide, and they have the domestic terror boogeyman of each side. You have Antifa and then the QAnon and the white supremacists and all of that stuff for the other. So,
well, and I would argue too that it's not going to happen. This is happening. It's already happening. Like, I mean, they use Tiger Swan at Standing Rock. I mean, we saw last summer in Portland, and now it's happening. It's still happening under Obama of DHS, federal cops in unmarked vehicles snatching people up. I mean, and that's, you don't think they're doing that in Minneapolis now and in Chicago where the protests are happening right now? And as the weather gets warmer, and look, there's going to be a mass shooting. Unfortunately, there's going to be a mass shooting every week. There's going to be cops are killing on average 3 people a day. And they've been doing this not since March. They've been doing this since 2005. An NBC poll or a survey showed cops have been killing on average 1,000 people a year since 2005. That's 3 people a day, roughly. And there has been like 3 cops arrested and charged. So 15,000 people roughly have been murdered by the police since in the last 15 years. And 3 cops have been 3. And okay, maybe some of those shootings were justifiable. The guy was shooting at okay, fine. But not only 3 out of 15,000. So, yeah. I mean, it's already happening. America has been decimated. The wealth gap has increased already.
Yeah. And the militarization of the police, by the way, has been going on for decades. I actually think that was a policy that started under Clinton, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah. I mean, this has been decades in the making. And the same time that this whole Homeland Security apparatus has been in the making. I think you can see how they're related, it's just really unfortunate. And I really fully expect that the Democrats are going to hijack calls for police reform and defund the police by increasing Silicon Valley's role in policing. And I'm not talking necessarily about like Google and Amazon and all of that, but there are a lot of startups focused specifically on law enforcement tech or predictive policing or surveillance stuff. And, they are going to have selling points at some point based on domestic unrest or domestic terror. It's safer for cops. It's safer for protesters that there aren't physical cops there. There's actually think tanks that have been trying to promote this idea for a while, actually, really ever since last year, saying that this is the way out. And it's not. It's definitely not. Because obviously it's a slippery slope, and it's really much would end up being the same system that the craziest people in the Bush administration wanted to implement after 9/11, and they couldn't even get that to go live in some cases, or even run for more than a couple of months. Those programs were so controversial, but who knows? I mean, if the squad cheers for it, a lot of people will go along with it.
Oh, yeah.
It's sold to them the right way.
And it'll be sold through the squad. It'll be sold like this will keep us safe, and and people will go, yay, AOCs for, mass incarceration and censorship, because it'll be sold in a way that'll sound flowery and fun, and they'll wrap it with a rainbow.
Yeah, I mean, they've already done that. A lot of the stuff that they were screaming about last year, they've become apologists for now. It should be really abundantly clear to everyone. And if there's people on the left that are still saying, oh, no, well, it's the extreme change in rhetoric between Biden and Trump about issues that are exactly the same or potentially worse, all of that's justified. I mean, I would encourage you to self-examine or get some help for your cognitive bias, maybe, because it's really we have to try and be objective here because, like I was saying earlier, there is an effort to emotionally manipulate the fabric of the United States so that it just rips at the seams because that chaos, they can come in. The more chaos you make, if you make maximum chaos, you can come in and then justify imposing maximum order, which means, I think everyone knows what that would mean. In the context of policing and National Guard and whatever. So
that's why I believe there's never been any real stringent gun reform, because they actually want Americans to all have guns, fighting with each other and shooting each other and mass chaos. This notion that Americans are all going to unify and they all have guns and they're going to rise up against the ruling elites is just, it's not going to, I don't see it happening, because the sophistication, as you talked about, the tactics, the propaganda tactics to keep America divided, distracted, and afraid are so successful that it's just, they just want everybody get a gun, shoot each other, be afraid of your neighbor, pick a side in these ridiculous teams, this red state, blue state, whatever, and just fight with each other. That's what they want, because they know they're ultimately outnumbered. They got a taste of how outnumbered they were last summer during all the mass protests. And when there was people literally outside of the White House burning trees down, they got a taste of it and the news didn't cover it. And so they got to keep everybody divided. And that's what that's as part of their tactic.
Yeah, I mean, in the United States, the fact they haven't even had to pass any sort of effort at gun control legislation, which would obviously provoke a huge outcry from the right. The fact that things have gotten that bad in the U.S. without that, that sort of division and tension, is a real testament to their ability to do so much of this just exclusively through, I guess you could say, passive means like the media and things like that, by just so creating such diametric opposites in terms of perception. Someone that's on the extreme end of a Democrat and someone that's on the extreme end of a Republican or a MAGA person, they live in different realities. They really do.
Yep. And that's what they're doing.
And how did that happen? Because they're consuming different sources of information that are giving them completely different, content. And obviously the truth is going to be somewhere in the middle. So, the American public is just really misinformed. And the Reagan era CIA director, Bill Casey, said something to the effect of the CIA's disinformation campaign will be complete when everything Americans believe is false. And we're really, that's pretty much, I feel like, been something that's pretty, if it hasn't come to completion already, it's, for a majority of Americans, it's not that far. I mean, a lot of people still believe myths, I guess you could say, about major events that have happened, like think we were justified to go to the war in Afghanistan in the first place, so for example, The Intercept recently had an article saying, oh, well, we could have left Afghanistan years ago. But no, we never should have been there in the first place. The reason the U.S. didn't like the Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11. It had to do with the fact that they pulled out of a pipeline deal with a California energy company that was backed by the U.S. government. The U.S. government supported the Taliban as late as 1998 until those pipeline deals ended. And then, of course, you have the well-known, at least by some people, the Taliban fatwa ruling that prohibited the cultivation of opium, which at the time Afghanistan had been producing a majority of the world's opium and to create heroin and other things, right? And so opium production plummeted, having global impacts on people that traffic opium-related drugs, like the CIA. And then you have the U.S. invasion not long after. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was the same year. Within the same year that, that ruling came from the Taliban and the invasion happened. And by the way, the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 was the first U.S. military operation of that scale, a publicly declared war that was planned not by the Pentagon, but by the CIA. And the first troops on the ground in Afghanistan were from the CIA Special Activities Division, they weren't from the military. So the CIA has always been very interested in what's going on there. And under Trump's Afghanistan deal, and I presume under Biden's, the CIA is allowed to stay even after withdrawal. So, including and their negotiations, the deal with the Taliban with Trump actually had a secret annex that was reported on only by Time Magazine and the Asia Times that talked about agreements about how the CIA would continue to would be allowed to operate in Taliban controlled areas, but it wasn't made public what those activities were. And the entire length of the war in Afghanistan, we have never known how many CIA people are in Afghanistan or what they do. What do you know?
That's weird. I wonder if talking about stuff like this is why Patreon pulled your money. Nah.
Yeah. I mean, there may be a correlation there. I don't know. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist.
Well, this is the thing, and you just said, and we're going to move on to your next article in a second here, but it is that this is the point, as you said, this ties to exactly why Patreon deplatform you, why I've been demonetized by YouTube, is because they don't want people coming to shows like ours using critical thinking and seeing how the things are really played, how it's all bullshit. They don't want, because I have viewers, and I'm sure you do. I have viewers that used to be Trump supporters. I have viewers that used to be big Democrats. I'm definitely way lefter, so I have way more lefties watching my show, but I have a lot of libertarians. I have a lot of people that were like, drinking the Kool-Aid from wherever. And they're waking up, and they don't want Americans waking up to the reality of it. They want you just pick a team, be on that team, Fox News, Republican, MSNBC, Democrat, whatever, QAnon, pick one of these crazy teams. And then we know we can manipulate you because we'll just feed you whatever team you've chosen. And we know how to package this propaganda for the Fox people. We know how to package this propaganda for the Vote Any Blue Will Do MSNBC crowd. QAnon's clearly a psyop. They package that really well, and that's been effective in saying. So then, like you just said, "Oh, I'm a wacky." You're joking. I'm a wacky conspiracy theorist. That's how good you see the purpose of QAnon. So now, anybody such as yourself or me who brings up any real fact-based cover-ups, we're called QAnon whack nuts.
Hey, well, it's only a matter of time until people that rightfully claim that Jeffrey Epstein had ties to intelligence are QAnon, because QAnon people believe the same thing, right? So, okay, these crazy people think water is wet, and so do I, so I'm the same as them. I mean, that's basically the logic there, and it's crazy, but it's actually been put out there. Same thing with people that, don't believe the official narrative on 9/11, saying everyone with that view is QAnon. There have been efforts in mainstream media to conflate that, and also people, critical of the COVID vaccine, trying to conflate QAnon with it being anti-vaccine,
right?
Or say, that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., as an example, because this was in a Washington Post article, is QAnon. Obviously that's a really unfair characterization because he never supported them. So, I mean, how could you say that? No. Unless you're, a hack that writes for the CIA Washington Post, basically.
Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood, and you're watching The Political Vigilante. I'm joined by returning guest, friend of the show, Whitney Webb. And Whitney, I wanted to talk to you about, and let me see if I can bring this up, this article you just did on Unlimited Hangout, which is your website. And I want to just share this on the screen so the audience can see it, because it's what you found is pretty alarming, but sadly, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's alarming, but it's not a surprise. So I just want to share this. So military bases housing migrant children plagued by serial sexual abuse claims. And this just came out a couple days ago on your website, Unlimited Hangout, which I urge people to go join and support your work, because as we were just talking, Patreon basically censored you, kicked you, or you chose to leave because they were like, "Oh, just take down all your articles and censor yourself, and we're going to still take your audience's money." So I urge everybody to go to Unlimited Hangout and support what Whitney is doing. So Whitney, go into detail, basically what you've uncovered what you uncovered.
Yeah,
down.
sure.
Yeah.
So a lot of people may have forgotten already because, it hasn't really been talked about that much. I mean, they have done reports on it, but it doesn't come up frequently anymore. And so they've let people forget about it. Anyway, in mainstream news, they talked about how children or minors that are in what they call migrant overflow facilities or whatever, a spin word they have on that.
A nice name, facility.
Yeah. Well, now there are facilities, tent cities, basically, that have been set up on 3 military bases. One of them is the most recent one was announced in California, but the initial announcement was for 2 bases in Texas, which is Fort Bliss and Joint Base San Antonio. Joint Base San Antonio has the highest rate of reported sexual assaults out of any joint base operated by the entire Department of Defense in the U.S. or abroad, according to a Pentagon study. So that's the Pentagon itself, that's straight from the horse's mouth. In 2014, for example, only around 3,000 out of 26,000 cases of sexual assault in the military were reported. So it's drastically underreported. So in a 3-year period, this particular base had almost 900 reports filed about sexual assault. And given how excessively underreported those assaults are, it was probably in the several thousand at that particular base. In that 3-year period. And now, these kids have been basically set up in tents at these 2 Texas bases and at Camp Roberts. And in the case of the Texas bases, soldiers aren't even allowed to photograph where these minors are living. Media have not been. No details have yet to be released of the military base, and we don't know exactly how many kids are there. This was being done by the HHS's Office of Refugee Resettlement. These negotiations with these military bases, they currently have about 13,000 minors in their custody. The other ones, there's a couple other thousand that are that are being held by Customs Border Protection also. So anyway, these military bases. And not just Joint Base San Antonio, but also Fort Bliss. I mean, Fort Bliss is really crazy if you actually look at just the recent incidents in the past year that have happened there. And it's really abundantly clear that the Fort Bliss leadership are super shady when it comes to sex crimes. In one example, there was a woman, female soldier named Asia Graham, that was sexually assaulted. And then a year later, almost a year to the day of her sexual assault, she was found dead. But Fort Bliss never released the cause of death for this woman. And only recently her rapist was arrested, but they just left it there. And in the case of another guy, Fort Bliss refused to confront a serial rapist on the base. And it wasn't until he was moved to a different base in New Jersey and raped his own daughter on base that he was actually, legal action was taken against him. And the whole time he was Fort Bliss, they did nothing. He raped numerous women, including the wives of soldiers that were under his charge. And in the case of one of the wives, her case was actually investigated. A lot of the other ones were not. And in her case, the criminal investigative division of the Army found evidence that that it had actually happened and recommended that prosecution takes place. Fort Bliss did not prosecute. And according to this lady, told her that's just how it was on the base, this guy. And he didn't just rape women, he cut women with broken bottles and all of this stuff. And this is the leadership of this base that is now holding thousands of kids who were super vulnerable, saying that type of stuff is just how it is at Fort Bliss. And that is totally insane that this is happening under the most progressive administration, the new FDR administration, all of this stuff. I mean, this is sick. And, if you're saying that, oh, well, it's not as bad as it was under Trump, you're not paying attention. There were talks actually during the Trump administration of doing this military base thing. It didn't go this far. And it didn't go to bases like this. And also, these 2 bases are also excessively polluted, have had major groundwater contamination with cancer-causing chemicals, and a lot of other issues. But that's really common in military bases, for them to be excessively polluted just because of the types of chemicals the military deals with. It's pretty common, actually. But the one in California that was approved is actually an active Environmental Protection Agency Superfund site, which means it's one of the most contaminated places in the entire country. And the entire base is classified as one. And these kids are living outside in tents. On Camp Roberts in California, soldiers that work there frequently report seeing raw sewage bubble up from the ground. There's around several hundred abandoned buildings on the property from the World War II era full of asbestos and lead. There are signs warning that there are mice infestations and that the rodents are or rats, rodents, and that there's a high risk of hantavirus, which is an airborne, often deadly virus. And it spreads outside by breathing in the air, and these kids are in tents there. I mean, it's nuts. It's nuts. And what's weird is that it seems like Biden's whole policy here, according to even mainstream media, is just to move the minors from the Customs Border Protections facilities, I guess, because those are most controversial, and move them to other types of facilities. But the facilities they're moving them to legally are not required to be held to any sort of regulation or standard of care that is required of other centers operated by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And there's attorneys that have visited some of these new types of centers that are in this category and said they don't even know if there's any rules governing what sort of standards, living standards, have to exist at these bases where these minors are. I mean, it's insane. It's insane.
And this is why, I mean, you're seeing how those that are really running the show actually were probably not fans of Trump, and not that Trump was this hero for the working people. Trump was pretty awful. He was just the most vulgar version of what presidents have been doing for a long time. And he would talk about it too openly. And that's where they're like, no, because they want everybody back to brunch. They want everybody not having time to protest in the streets or take direct action, or they don't want people showing up at town halls. They want everybody to think, oh, Biden, Kamala, and the squad, they've got it. It's all better now. Hey, they're not perfect, but they're doing. No, and it's like, this is what was so maddening.
Yeah, give them time, they're saying. Well, what's crazy about that is like a bunch of these kids, according to these attorneys that have visited, every kid they talked to had contact information for their family, and they wanted to go be with their family, and they weren't even allowed to call their family in some cases once, like twice a week. And their main concern, when they were talking to these attorneys, they were telling these attorneys their main concern was just stuff like, my family's probably worried about me. I need to let them know I'm alive and stuff. They're not even allowed to like talk to them that frequently. But shouldn't they be? If the crisis is so bad and there's so many kids, and the kids know where their families are, why aren't they being released to the families? In a lot of cases, they're not being released to families. They're being released to sponsors that are supposed to undergo extreme, careful background checks, all done by a case manager. But it was recently reported by mainstream media, CBS News, that most of these kids haven't even seen case managers. And these attorneys, every kid they spoke to hadn't spoken to a single case manager. So the problem isn't being addressed. I mean, if you wanted to start resolving the problem, the kids that know where their families are, you send them with their family, whether their family is located in the U.S. or their home country or whatever. If the goal is not to have all these vulnerable kids that are unaccompanied with no adults to look out for them in these super overcrowded facilities where awful stuff is happening. The governor of Texas came out recently, I think just a day or two after I put out this article, saying one of the facilities that are in this category, not a military base, but another one, because they're also like former oil rig worker camps and former mining camps and stuff are being like refitted to house kids too, right? At one of these facilities in San Antonio, just a really high rate of sexual abuse claims, kids claiming that they were being sexually abused by workers there. And there have actually been convictions in Arizona. One guy was going around molesting little boys while they slept and stuff like that. and was allowed to work there for a really long time. And he was HIV positive. I mean, it's just like, they're not vetting anything, and it's almost like they're doing it on purpose. And I say that because if you actually like look into this type of stuff about what happens to kids, whether it's Epstein or something else, the US military, out of all the internet service providers in the world, the network of the Department of Defense consistently ranks in the top 5 of internet service providers that host the most child porn. Why is that? It's the military's network.
Really?
Yeah, this isn't CNN. I mean, this is not like, oh, where'd you get that? Q? No, this is actually, there was a bipartisan legislation effort to curb the use of the prevalence of child porn on Department of Defense computers, because there were actually like a bunch of officials caught up in a DHS sting for child porn. I think it was as many as 500 Pentagon officials at the time, and it just totally swept under the rug. So, if you're going to have that type of no accountability, and you're going to have so many kids and they know where their families are, and they're not, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a wild situation to really think about. I don't even know if I can fully wrap my head around it, but it's a mess. But this is also part of what happens when you have not only this president, but the previous president. They're both rapists. So, I mean, it's not like they're really going to care about sexual abuse.
No, and this is what's so maddening is they're both rapists. And, this is the problem I have with, so obviously the MAGA people are crazy, but the blue MAGA people in some ways I think are worse, because they're all like, me too, believe all women, but Tara Reade, maybe not so much. Like that kind of shit drives me absolutely insane. And they're like, well, give Biden time. Biden time for what? To clean up the cages that were built under Obama when he was vice president, when they deported 3 million people? Is that there's always this, that's the thing about this stupid two-party system. I mean, it's stupid by design, is that there's always this, well, we got to clean up the mess of the last guy. No, it's all been awful.
It's actually the same policy, and they keep following it and advancing the same agenda. They're not cleaning up after the next guy, and they're picking up where they left off. I mean, that's how it's consistently been. I mean, look at Obama and the baton toss from George W. Bush. Citigroup chose his cabinet. I mean, that seems pretty consistent with the Goldman Sachs banker that was Secretary of the Treasury under Bush being like, bail out the banks or martial law to Congress. And then Obama has Citigroup choose his cabinet. I mean, these guys all work for the same people, and a lot of times they're, bankers, oligarchs, And
so, but I want to get, I mean, you've obviously uncovered a lot of all this awful stuff that is happening to these kids who are being put in cages that were built under the Obama administration.
Yeah.
That people on the left only got mad at when Trump put kids in cages. And obviously there's this, I didn't know that about the military servers have like the number one.
Yeah. Well, it's in the top 5. They won't say which one it is. But I mean, that's an insane statistic. Cause I mean, you're thinking about a military network. It's not like a bunch of like people that you would think in your head, the stereotype of a person that would be into that. And would they use the military computer for that? It's like, why is there so much on there? And also why will Amazon Web Services not get rid of all the child porn on its servers? Apparently, I mean, it's been targeted by a bunch of advocate groups. Because it continues to host this stuff, and it knows it's there, and they won't take it down. Will the Washington Post report on this? No.
It's weird. They won't report on that. And I know there's software that can recognize it, because a friend of mine was a cop for 24 years, and his last 10 years, I think, on the force, maybe longer, he was a child crimes investigator. And now he works for a company that they make software that recognizes child pornography, so investigators aren't exposed to having to look at all this stuff. So I know the software's out there that Amazon could just implement to go, recognize it and immediately delete it. They could just do that, but they don't. But why don't they want to do that? Which begs the question, since you've done so much work.
Amazon Web Services is where the intelligence agencies, all of their data is held. I would say that might be a likely culprit after, Epstein, Franklin scandal, and all of these other instances. of their involvement and things like that. So.
Well, this is my next question here, since that's obviously good information to know. So Amazon, we know, works hand in glove. I mean, when the CIA paid Jeff Bezos $600 million to host their servers, that's when that's how that happens. And that's why the Washington Post is always pushing State Department talking points. And in the extent work that you've done about Epstein and the intelligence community, you've come on this show and enlightened myself, and I feel like I'm fairly knowledgeable about Epstein. But I always feel like a dilettante when I'm talking to you when it comes to this, because your knowledge base is you're so thorough, Whitney. It's why I love having you on the show. But
well, thank you.
in light of all the research that you've done about Epstein, especially since we're going on 2 years now, almost 2 years since he was arrested, and all the uncovering of the deep state, the people like Les Wexner, and now you're talking about the military knowing that kids are being abused. Is there any evidence to suggest that these are hubs for trafficking?
Well, we know that as a result of this crisis and these kids being in these facilities and this effort to release some so that more can be housed in these facilities and have there have been documented instances reported in mainstream media of human trafficking taking place. And a lot of it is actually to have these minors being taken to places where they have to work without pay and stuff like that. They're slaves, basically. This happened, for instance, one case I can remember off the top of my head involved kids being released to a sponsor, and it turned out the sponsor wasn't really vetted, and he basically took all these minors to this egg farm in Ohio, and they had to work there until it was found out. But how many times does that not get found out? Because it's actually, government policy to only make one follow-up call once these kids are released. So who knows what happens to them after that initial phone call's made a month after they're sent away with a sponsor. And actually, in some cases, they end up, when they make the follow-up call, it turns out they're not with the sponsor anymore. They're with a non-sponsor, and that's apparently fine with someone that has no relation to them, no background check. So there are a lot of holes for kids to fall through here. And what's really alarming to me is that the huge volume of kids makes it really easy for some to just slip through the cracks. And the fact that there have been documented sexual predators working at these facilities, they're sending them to, in the case of Camp Roberts, like squalid places, intense. I mean, they're not even buildings. And people can't even photograph what's going on there. And also under the Biden administration, I mean, they even tried to keep mainstream media out of the custom border protections facilities for like several months. I mean, they don't want people seeing what's going on there in a way that I don't think happened under the previous administrations where this was a policy. So, I mean, those all seem like huge red flags to me. The fact that it's happened, how often does it happen? I mean, we can't really say, but clearly the way they're responding to this situation is not going to fix any of the problems that are allowing those types of cases to happen. It's probably actually increasing the ease of a bad actor to take advantage of kids in this system. And in some cases, parents weren't even notified their kids were in some of these facilities. And it wasn't until someone saw the kids and sort of knew the parents or something that they were able to notify them their children were being held. And then they started calling the government, asking the kids to be released to them, and they don't get an answer. And also, I forgot this, in 2018, HHS publicly admitted that they lost track of 1,500 kids that year. And that's what they admit to. It could be more. I don't know. So it's apparently supposed to reach like one of the highest levels ever of these minors crossing the US-Mexico border this year. How many will they lose? I don't know. I mean, no one's really paying attention because they're so good at distracting us with other stuff and not covering things that actually matter in mainstream media half the time,
Yeah, and then you've got AOC going, look, it's not good what's happening, but it's not as bad as under Trump. Trump ripped babies, out of mom's hands. And it's like, that's a blatant lie. Under the Obama administrations, there's all these reportings, official documents. I show them on this show of people reporting crimes, assault, sexual assault, abuse under the Obama administration. All these things were reported. So like, it's just, and that's the other thing. AOC just, makes it okay and allows the Any Blue Will Do crowd to sleep at night with their delusions that Biden and the Democrats are somehow better but I want to go back to
really quick. It's not just, that the Obama administration made these policies. They made this crisis because most of the people coming for both adults and minors, a lot of them for years, most of them for years have been from Honduras. And Honduras was couped by the Hillary Clinton State Department in 2009 under Obama. And the regime that the U.S. has backed there ever since is driving these people out because it's a horrendous dictatorship. And it's installed and backed by the U.S. government just recently. And it's no coincidence the border crisis has surged since then.
Of course, it's all of our coups and sanctions and war that creates all of these crises. And
they know this. I want to make that clear. They know this. And they knew this crisis would happen as a result of that.
I would argue that it's probably deliberate because we know through the Epstein stuff that one of the ways that Virginia Roberts Giuffre and Maria Farmer said he would joke about, I'm buying up poor kids and their families will just give me money. So they want kids that have no record, that have no home.
They do. And speaking of Maria Farmer, she talked about how there were a bunch of maids from the Philippines in Epstein's residences. And one of them told her that she had been stolen. It's a direct quote, stolen. So where did they come from? So Epstein wasn't just involved in sex trafficking and the trafficking of minors. He was also labor trafficking. And it seems like, at least from the cases that have been reported, most of the trafficking, when it does happen to these kids that are caught up on the border, they end up being trafficked for labor as undocumented workers taken and just, basically treated like slaves.
Of course. And, anywhere there's a Clinton involved, there's got to be something awful happening.
Yeah. Well, someone told me, I really hope people in the chat maybe can let me know if they've seen this too. But someone who I have a lot of confidence in was telling me that Laura Silsby, the Clinton affiliate that got caught trying to traffic kids out of Haiti after the earthquake, apparently works for a company that contracts to the Amber Alert system now. How the fuck is that okay? That is so insane.
But that tells you, look, it's insane. But also, if you get into their horrific mentality, so their mentality is, how can we legally snatch these kids up? How can we create crises to snatch these kids up and look like we're the good guys? That's the Clinton Foundation. It's helping people. It's like, this Ghislaine Maxwell had some Save the Ocean Foundation that was educating 14-year-olds on ocean safety. Good Lord.
Yeah.
And again, what the Clinton Foundation did in Haiti has been documented. And so it seems like in the same way that Les Wexner and, Epstein would use modeling to traffic and go to, 13-year-old, 14-year-old girls. Oh, hey, you want to be a famous model? Well, and they would snatch them up that way. These same folks are using the border crisis. I mean, if you're a predator and you're not going to get monitored, you're going to get a job with border security, just like you're going to, or with, the Boy Scouts or the Catholic Church or whatever. And not to say everyone in those organizations is a pedophile that's trafficking kids, but if you're a predator, again, my friend who was a child crimes investigator would always say this: you can't go fishing in a parking lot. He goes, so when we had suspected a predator, they always had some job or something that was around kids and access to kids. Jerry Sandusky had this disadvantaged youth. And again, what my child crimes investigator friend said, he goes, you show me 100 kids that were abused, 99 of them came from disadvantaged homes, or there weren't two parents, or they didn't have a lot of money, and they were easily taken advantage of. And that's what predators look for, because a kid that grows up with two nice parents that are paying attention, that kid's not going to be in some facility. They're not going to, you know what I mean? They're less likely to be abused. I mean, they still can be, but so what does the predator want? The predator wants easy prey.
Yeah. And on that note, most of the organizations that claim to be in support of children that are at risk or abused children are not what they seem. Save the Children, the organization, was founded by Oxfam, which is like affiliated with the UK government, of their workers doing food for sex scandals, refusing to give food aid to families unless they could have sex with their teenage daughters and stuff like that. It's extremely prevalent in groups like this. And a lot of these groups like Save the Children, you know who one of their main fundraisers was in 1985? Who hosted a big Save the Children gala? It was Ghislaine Maxwell.
Oh.
What do you know? That seems normal to have someone like that, who, by the way, you know, all of that child trafficking stuff in that network, even if the official blackmail operation with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell didn't start until 1991, back in the 80s, that was totally going on in that same network. They were all involved in a part in. And I mean, it's a mess. But I mean, that's just one example. That Oxfam report found that numerous charities that claim to protect refugees, that get tons of money, millions of dollars a year in donations from people thinking it's going to help kids, that their workers are doing this. And there's been no accountability, none, whether in these organizations or from different governments that have investigated this, found there to be proof of it. They just, you know, it comes out in the media, it makes a little blip, and then it goes away. Another example, the U.S.'s National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is run, since it was created, is run by a guy called Ernie Allen. And they are one of the main forces involved with the whole Amber Alert system. And Ernie Allen, before he was put in charge of the center, and by the way, the international version of that Center for Missing and Exploited Children was later basically launched by Hillary Clinton herself and the wife of Tony Blair. So clearly, you know, if you're having these people back your, you know, Save the Exploited Children organization, it's a little suspect. But especially in the case of putting Ernie Allen in charge, right before he started leading these organizations, he was involved. He was sent to Belgium to advise the government of Belgium about how to respond to the Dutroux affair, as it's called. And basically, it was this electrician, Marc Dutroux, who kidnapped women, locked them up, chained them up in his basement, and it was frequented by the richest, most elite people in Belgium, including politicians. It was basically like the Epstein for Belgium in the late 90s. This guy was sent there to advise the government about how to respond, and things like the top law enforcement guy that was supposed to investigate that and didn't investigate anything, never looked at the tapes, refused to investigate reports of girls' screams coming from the house and all of this stuff. With Ernie Allen's advice, he gets promoted to police commissioner and stuff like that. And so that's the guy that still is running running these organizations. He might have stepped down in recent years. Actually, I'll have to go back and look, but if so, it was really recently, and he's still really influential in these circuits. Like, for example, he's on the board of the Ashton Kutcher Fight Online Child Abuse NGO that is really shady. I actually came on and talked about it before. He's on the board of that group.
Jesus.
But I mean, it's nuts. So this is supposed to be what's supposed to, protect children. The system that's there, like Amber Alerts and stuff. I mean, if they don't want a certain group or a certain kid to be found, they just don't put out an Amber Alert. If you're a bad person with access to that system. I mean, and the fact that like this Silsby lady is like at a company affiliated with that system is just like, if you put the traffickers, the criminals in charge of the thing that's supposed to regulate that crime, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, this is how everything is run. I mean, cops investigate themselves.
It's
Who
true.
Investigates Wall Street? Wall Street investigates, or politicians that are paid by Wall Street investigate it. Who investigates the military? Oh, the military investigates the military. So
the CIA investigates itself. It's always like that, isn't it? And they always find no wrongdoing. It's really convenient. And people are fine with that. They're like, oh, well, the investigation happened, you know, but some people actually think there were legit official investigations of thing where actually there was no official investigation. So for example, the 9/11 Commission, both the chair and vice chair of the 9/11 Commission say that they were lied to directly by Pentagon officials, by intelligence officials, that the report that they issued can't answer fundamental questions, essential questions about the nature of the attack, and that it's not a complete investigation. And that's straight from the horse's mouth as you can get, right? But people assume that it's been, you know, investigated, it was investigated and whatever. And now the guy that was in charge of, with all the conflicts of interest, that was put in charge of the 9/11 Commission or overseeing it after they couldn't get Henry Kissinger approved for it, is now going to come in for Biden and assess COVID policy. So that's comforting. And by comforting, I mean not comforting.
So, yeah, of course. So
yeah.
With regard to this, what's happening at the border, Whitney, what, as you see this, what can people who are like watching this show, what can they do? How can we help stop this? I mean, or change it, or what? I don't know. It feels very overwhelming, but what can we do?
Well, I think starting off with the military-based thing is a good point, because I think a lot of people don't even know that there's kids being housed on these military bases there, as an example. Most people think they're going to these overflow facilities, or they're at CBP facilities and all of this stuff. The situation is really similar to like it was under Trump. And I think people, maybe it's because they all went back to brunch anyway. A lot of people are unaware of how things have changed in just a few months. And I think it's really important to raise awareness about that, specifically among the groups that cared about it under Trump, because yeah, some of the people, you know, specifically the politicians, you know, are hacks, and we're doing that for political gain. But I think a lot of the people, you know, grassroots wise that were outraged by that then would be outraged if they knew how things were now. And so, you know, I think that, you know, those people are really important to reach with that stuff, because if you can generate the same sort of outcry about that and put pressure on it, you know, it can have an effect. So basically there was recently there was some report, I forget what outlet did it, that came out that showed that one of the facilities that the Biden administration had opened was awful. And then out of shame, because of the media report, they closed the facility 2 weeks later. So, you know, they do respond to pressure about some of this stuff because there's a reason they're trying to keep the media out, and it's because they're afraid. But there is information coming out. You know, that's how I was able to put this report together. But I think it's really important to raise awareness. But unfortunately, you know, people's interest is elsewhere. Some of it on things that are kind of, you know, I would argue not as critical as this. But, you know, I mean, the media is really good at distracting us with things. You know, like in the case of the UK, you know, they you know, infinite Prince Philip dying coverage, and there's no other news happening apparently. You know, mainstream media in the US does that sort of stuff too. They'll find like some sort of story that they can just, you know, use as filler to avoid reporting real news. Because the mainstream media doesn't just like, you know, there are instances where they deliberately put out false stories and stuff like that, but a lot of it is just lying through omission by ignoring or not covering stories.
Yep, that's what they do. Yeah, Prince Philip, but like, who cares? Why do I care about some British royal? Why do I care about
racist loser? How about that? You know,
and the royal family that has all this history of pedophiles and sex trafficking. Where, you know, Prince Andrew, where's who's
trying to rehabilitate his image now? Apparently, he's like hired people to help his come back. Whatever. Oh my God. I mean, if people in the UK stand for that, that'll be really unfortunate. I mean, you can't let that dude rehabilitate himself. He's gross.
Yeah.
All the people with Epstein are gross. And well, that's my opinion, but it's not like a very journalistic statement. Sorry about that. But, you know, as an example, so like Biden, and I think we've talked about this before, there's going to be a confirmation hearing soon for Eric Lander, who is going to be Biden's top science advisor and is going to be elevated to a cabinet level position. So he's, you know, on par with Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, all of those guys. And he was funded and photographed meeting with Epstein. and praising some eugenicist guy in 2018. And the people that criticized the crud out of him for praising the eugenicist guy in 2018 now say it's fine that he's in the Biden administration because the person working directly underneath him is an African-American woman. So that totally absolves him of praising a guy who said that people of African descent have genetically inferior intelligence. It's fine. It's fine. So, I fully expect, because no one wants to talk about that story, despite it being documented. It's there. The Epstein pictures there. The Jeffrey Epstein VI Foundation promoting on its website that it's funding Eric Lander's research and all of this stuff. Mainstream media has been uninterested despite the Epstein scandal and connecting this guy who's going to be the top science advisor to I believe the science and follow the science. Joe Biden is going to be an Epstein scientist. And Epstein, I doubt that at his confirmation hearing, anyone will even ask him about the Epstein ties, despite it being obviously in the public interest. And if it comes out, the dude won't be confirmed, I hope it does, because is it really going to be a nation governed by Epstein science? Are people actually going to that's fine. I just don't understand. Plus, the other thing about Eric Lander is that he runs something called the Broad Institute, which is basically MIT, Harvard, and Silicon Valley coming to steal and use your health data for their own ends. And Eric Schmidt is on the board of it, among other Silicon Valley figures. So, it's good.
Oh man, all this diversity in the Biden cabinet is just too much to handle. All this diversity, all this wonderful. It's just the diversity of the ruling class and diversity of Epstein people and the diversity of the war machine and the diversity of big pharma and the diversity of Wall Street. It's so great. Oh my God. Yeah, Joe Biden is a horrible piece of shit. So is everyone in his fucked up cabinet. And they can all go fuck themselves.
I agree. You said it. Yeah.
They can all
high five.
Yeah, high five all around. I'm not a journalist. I'm a comedian, so I don't give a shit. They're all gross.
Yeah, you get to say more stuff like that. Yeah,
they're soulless, maggot-ridden, diseased vermin, and there's a special place in hell for them. But enough of that. Whitney, thank you so much for taking. I know it's getting late where you're at. We have over 1,000 people watching. Please hit the like button, subscribe, tune in, do all this. So where can people follow your work? I know you're on Rockfin. It's another great reason, folks, to join Rockfin, because for $10 a month, that's the other thing. For Patreon, you had to support Whitney's Patreon, my Patreon, Jimmy Dore, all these people individually. Now, if you support Rockfin's premium, you get Whitney's premium, my premium, Ron Placone, everybody. Jimmy Dore, Lee Camp.
Abby Martin's on there.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. And some other people. So
yeah,
it's definitely worth checking out.
Where can people follow you?
Okay, well, since you gave Rockfin a big plug, I won't mention that. If you're on Telegram, which I actually recommend, because you can also, there's like a chat for people tied to Unlimited Hangout, but also like a channel that's sort of like a news feed that you can follow specific to my work and my website. So even if I publish somewhere else, like The Last American Vagabond, where I also contribute, you can find all my stuff posted directly there in case I get booted off of Twitter, because who knows how long I'll be there. But you can also follow me on Twitter for now at _ Whitney Webb. And like I said earlier, if you don't want to sign up for Rockfin but want to support my work, you can go to unlimitedhangout.com, go to the Support Us tab, and you can either join that. We offered more payment options than Patreon actually offers. So if you don't want to pay in regular currency, for example, you can get access to that Patreon equivalent with Bitcoin, or you can pay via PayPal or the usual stuff, credit card, whatever. So for those that are interested, I really appreciate it, because it allows me to continue doing what I do after Patreon tried to really pull the rug out under for me. And I'm sure Patreon will continue to do this to other people. It's really unfortunate that they're doing that, because, people want to support different content creators. I don't understand why they think they can get in the middle, but they've done so. So, you're trusting them with your stuff, with your money at your own risk, because what happens if in the case of The Last American Vagabond, they also got deplatformed off of Patreon. before I did, but they did it right at a time where things had just paid out, and then they suspended the page. So Ryan from there couldn't access the money that patrons had paid out to him. Ooh. So
Yeah,
risky.
I mean, look, Richard Medhurst said he got kicked off of PayPal. Like they're just gonna try to stick it to us financially, however they can, to get us to shut up. That's what they're gonna.
Yeah, because the other censorship hasn't worked, because I think even though censorship is increasing, trust in mainstream media continues to crater. People are going to gravitate towards truth or truthful content despite censorship efforts. Even if you censor all critical thinking and independent thought and only leave like one flavor of news out there, people are gonna, even if it takes them longer to find, they're gonna go out and look for something different because it's not content that's appealing to them. So, you know, censorship can only take them so far. They're trying to go after our income, and that is really not good.
Yeah. So support what Whitney's doing, everybody, so that she can keep bringing stories like she just brought to us today. So Whitney.
Well, really quick, if I can, before we wrap up about the Patreon thing, there are a lot of smaller channels that are still dependent on Patreon and haven't had, you know, maybe you're supporting me and you were supporting some other channels and you decide to get off the platform. Please make sure you follow up with those smaller channels and see the other ways you can support them that aren't Patreon, because I feel really bad that if you're you know, you were a patron of mine, for example, or you're watching this and you want to get off of Patreon, you know, there are some good content creators out of there that have sort of, you know, that have lost a decent amount of their monthly income from Patreon because people have been boycotting the platform because of this new censorship policy. So make sure you think about them so they don't get left behind too.
Yeah, that's a great point. As I tell people, if you're going to cancel my Patreon, I totally get it. I'm not mad at you at all, but just please support me some other way. Venmo, PayPal, or I prefer Rockfin is the best one. So thank you, Whitney, for making that point. We'll really appreciate you taking time to come on the show. I know it's late there, and
it's okay.
we love having you on the show. We'll have you whenever you want. You know, you just
Thanks.
You just let me know when you're on the show and we'll make it happen.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, thanks for the open invitation. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you letting me on to talk about this stuff. And, you know, give my spiel to your audience, I guess. But I really would encourage people to try and follow my work on Unlimited Hangout. You can sign up to a mailing list or other ways. And same, I don't know if you have alternatives to, you know, Twitter and Facebook, Graham, but definitely recommend you set up something, because they're going to come for that next. If they don't do it sooner, they'll do it later, you know.
They will. Yeah, I'm working on that. I'm doing Panquake and other stuff. I'm waiting for other stuff to happen. So we're everyone's aware. Everyone has the same feeling, like we need to create our own thing that they can't screw up. So people are hungry for it, because everyone knows they're being lied to one way or another. Everybody knows they're being lied to one way or another.
Yeah. It's really a matter of disagreeing about the scales of the lies, I think, at the end of the day, or who's telling the lies. If you only think one side is lying to you, you've been had.
Yes, without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. Well, Whitney, thank you so much. And we'll talk to you soon. And everybody check out Unlimited Hangout.
Thanks.
All right. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Whitney Webb, everybody. Isn't it awesome? Don't you just, I just feel so, when she comes on the show, man, it's so extensive what she does. That's why it's like, please follow her, please support her, because she goes so extensive on all this stuff. It's so fantastic. And she makes these connections. She connects the dots. It's just like, whoa. And it always makes perfect sense. What do I say on the show? Follow the money, connect the dots, get the truth. That's it. Follow the money, connect the dots, find the truth. There it is. That's all she does. That's all she does. She just goes deep, and she's a real journalist. She's out there digging deep. So thanks for watching, everybody. Please hit the like button, the subscribe button. Go to patreon.com/Graham Elwood and rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, where you can support the show. Also, I have a Bitcoin wallet, a Bitcoin Cash wallet, and an Ethereum wallet in the show notes. We're taking cryptocurrency. I have a Coinbase affiliation link. We're going to be getting on some other exchanges. So that's how you support the show. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. YouTube is unsubscribing us at an alarming rate. I have a PayPal button at grahamelwood.com. I even have a Venmo at Graham-Elwood. There's a lot of ways to support our show. We are getting crushed by YouTube. We've dipped under 73,000 subscribers because of YouTube. Thanks for supporting what we do.